Hey guys, it's Mr. C. I'm just calling, logging in, recording a video for you, like I said that I would. First of all, I appreciate everybody for on Wednesday and Thursday. I feel like the election was something that we needed to talk about, especially given the fact that it's only one every 4 years. I appreciate those of you that were a little less disappointed in the outcome, for being respectful and appreciative of your classmates that may have been a little more disappointed in the outcome. I appreciate those of you who were disappointed for contributing and being part of the conversation, and frustration and anger, indicate the conversation. I thought the conversations were good. I have I sent out for Canvas review sheet for the test. You will know you do. You won't need to prepare for those. They're not going to be real academic. They're not going to need to require study much, but you should do some reflection and thought about those prompts before you get in to class. Those to you before Thanksgiving, between now and then. We'll try to give you time. All right, start with chapter 11. Hindsight. More prominent. Go ahead, 11 today, so that you would have this. There's probably tensions on, so I want to make sure that we for the things that it does, its priority course of the semester is that Texas really doesn't pay for much. They don't believe in government spending. They're once again very libertarian. This is one of the themes of the course we've had so far. So we're going to see kind of how they do manage to do some things as we go along. So, one of the things that's important to you guys, especially if you are moving on to a 4-year degree, then it is somebody says the cost of tuition, and that's one of the things that Texas decided to cut back on the state level funding. I'm sorry, not 2003. Since then, we've seen a huge increase in that, as colleges have to make up the difference on their own, usually through tuition. What's important about Texas is that it does get a balanced budget. So every dollar that it spends, it must have a tax offset to pay for, and a limited amount of revenue coming in because of the way the Constitution works, and that means that spending is also going to be very strictly limited. The comptroller, who is elected officials, is the one that kind of handles that and decides whether or not the budget is going to be in balance. It's not the powers to send them back to fix it. It's complicated, has lots of details. We could kind of divide it into 5 categories: general revenue, non-dedicated revenue, state's primary operating funds, general revenues, which are dedicated, so they have a very specific purpose, federal funds budget, and this is important on the test as well, to understand kind of how the relationship between the federal government and the state works in terms of federal funds. Where does the money come from? Where does it go? What are some limitations on those funds, and where they can go and how they can be used? Other budget funds not included in the state budget include state highway fund, trust funds, other revenue. And then, of course, all budgets. And then all of those things are going to be different ways of accounting for some of the different ways that we do things. Okay, I'm going to skip some of these. Right, so Texas involves huge amounts of money. And this is what's interesting is that even though they do invest in some things that are and given the size of the state and the number of citizens that it has, it's going to be even more large, even though it's not broad necessarily. Education is a big chunk of it. Health and human services, as well. Things like healthcare, things like Medicare, Medicaid, things like welfare services, poverty services, things like that. And there's a great pressure to maximize federal dollars and minimize state spending and not raise taxes. So if you're going to get money from the state, you need to find ways to maximize those funds and use those to the best possible use to avoid the state having to kick in. Okay, Texas spends less than other states. It's ranked 46th in per capita state expenditures. It's considered a low service, low tax state. Meaning that it has a low tax rate, low taxes that it takes in, and it therefore has a low services that it provides. So they don't spend much and they don't buy much with their money. So that's going to help them maintain a balanced budget and a pro-business environment. That's been one of our themes throughout the course of the year, has been pro-business. Okay. Number of state workers is smaller than other states. So the size of the government, the number of people that work for the state government is very small in Texas, and it is incredibly small, especially given the size of the state. All right, so taxes are important element of public finance. State tax revenues per 1,000 of personal income, per capita state revenues. Both measures Texas is low. Texas is one of 9 states with no personal income tax, but there is a high sales tax. So what that means is that you don't pay income on your you don't pay tax on your income in the state. You do on the federal level, everyone pays that. But most states have a state income tax as well that they use to generate revenue. Texas is one of 9 states that does not. But to offset that, it has a very, very high sales tax. It's basically you pay for what you buy, you pay for what you use from a tax perspective. Income taxes are what we call a progressive tax, meaning that the more that you earn, the more that you pay. So higher wage earners, higher brackets will pay more taxes than people in lower brackets. A sales tax-based model is considered regressive, meaning that people at the lower end of the bracket end up actually paying more taxes, a larger percentage of their income in taxes, because they have less discretionary income, because so much more of their taxes do have to be used to buy necessities. They're not saved, they're not put away, things like that. Then sales tax-based systems tend to be regressive, which means they're going to hurt lower income people or have a larger impact on lower income people than they are higher. So those are kind of the differences between the impact of a progressive versus a regressive, or a state income tax system versus a sales tax system. Okay, 47.4% of state revenues come from taxes of one sort or another. Sales tax, oil and natural gas production, motor fuel tax, 20 cents per gallon. Obviously, sales tax is the largest, which in a pro-business state, that's actually not necessarily a bad thing. To have a lot of your income coming from economic activities as opposed to income. When you have a large, vibrant business culture, then that actually is not as negative as it might be if you had, say, a sluggish economic environment. The motor vehicle tax, franchise tax on corporations, tobacco and cigarette sales, alcohol beverage taxes, insurance. So there's lots of little things in which the state uses to recoup and bring in money without having to resort to a personal income tax, which is what many other states do. Once again, Texas is trying to avoid that, and then these are some of the ways that they do that. Hotel tax, inheritance tax was eliminated in 2005. Utilities, just all these little bitty things here and there. All right. Here's just an interesting chart. Once again, the purple here is the sales tax, and that's where the biggest chunks of Texas state revenue comes from. Oil and gas production, motor vehicles, motor fuels, franchise. So you see that the purple, the sales tax, is the biggest chunk of that. Over half of it comes from that. And remember that the Texas budget is on a biennium, meaning it's biannual. Every 2 years, they set up a new budget and a new finance system. And so when we talk about the budget, we're talking about it in that context of being 2 years and not one, at least in terms of the way that it goes through the process. Okay. Once again, regressive tax, such as a sales tax, burden heavily falls on lower income individuals. Progressive, the tax burden falls more heavily on upper incomes. Income taxes are progressive. 2013, a study found that 1/5 of regressive tax systems in the nation, or let me rephrase it, had the 5th most regressive tax system. That means that only 4 other systems in the U.S. are considered more difficult or challenging for low-income people. And no one has really wanted to support tax reform, especially not an income tax. Matching fund grants are low. Matching funds grants basically are, we are going to pay in so much money and you're going to match that at the federal level. Or actually, it works the other way. The federal government promises so much if the state will also kick in a matching funds amount. The problem is that a lot of those funds are not programs that they're often program specific, and they're either programs that the state chooses not to invest in or chooses not to invest in at the same level. Other large source of income is the lottery, which we'll talk about that later. Okay, most money sent by the state doesn't flow into and out of one pot. There's lots of different funds, lots of different places where money goes and comes from, depending upon its source, depending upon its destination, and the legislature has some discretion into how these things work. Okay, there's the general fund. It's non-dedicated general revenue dedicated sources. The permanent school fund. This is an important concept. Funds primarily for secondary and primary schools, distributes funds to school districts across the state. By the State Board of Education kind of controls that. The available school fund, dedicated fund to support public education. Now, the permanent school fund is funded partially by bonds that are issued by the schools themselves. It's also funded based on attendance. So attendance is very important. When kids don't go to school, it actually costs their school money because they base payments out of the permanent school fund on annual daily attendance. Available school fund is dedicated to fund public education, state highway funds. Obviously, that's pretty straightforward. The Economic Stabilization Fund, or rainy day fund, is meant to provide relief during times of financial distress. This was a big deal a few years ago. After the financial crisis, the state had to make some huge cuts to education. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 or $6 billion it had to cut from the budget for education. And that money could have come from the Economic Stabilization Fund to make up the difference, but the state chose not to dip into that rainy day fund. And it was quite controversial. There were lots of school boards and lots of teachers and administrators that challenged the state on not allowing those funds to be used. Basically, they argued, what is economic distress if it's not this? Okay, also the 400, including the 400 funds, some of them are tied to higher education, like the Permanent University Trust Fund. And this was created very early on in the state of Texas in the 1870s, and it is designed specifically to support the University of Texas and Texas A&M system. It's a land grant. So they have this piece of land, they have this land that they've been invested in, and they're using the interest off of different parcels of land around the state to basically, the interest off of that to fund the university systems. Texas and Texas A&M are the only ones that can draw from this permanent university fund. So other schools like the University of North Texas or Tarleton's part of the A&M system now, or Sam Houston or Texas State, they don't get to draw from this permanent fund. However, these two systems have been growing recently. In the last probably 20 years, more and more colleges have joined the UT and A&M system, meaning that more and more schools have gone from being independent and getting a piece of this. Also, the Higher Education Fund supports universities that do not have access to PUF funds. So there is some other funds out there. And the National Research University Fund is a very specific type of higher education funding mechanism that's dedicated to schools that meet certain research and development type goals. So how does the Texas Constitution affect the budget? Must write every 2 years, meets only 2 years. Agencies are forced to project budgetary needs without clear knowledge of the problems to be faced in 2 years. So this is one of the challenges, is that agencies are being asked to be able to predict what's going to happen in 2 years, and the budget pretty much is set. And so that's I can't talk today. That's a challenge for these different, because you may not know. So if you had a special session that started in, say, 2006, and you projected through 2008, you did not know that the financial crisis was going to happen at the end of 2007 and cause a huge problem in terms of the state budget. So these types of fluctuations can cause problems if you don't have the flexibility in your constitution structure to take care of them, which Texas does not. Okay, a large portion of the budget is dedicated for specific purposes by federal law or by the Texas Constitution. So there's not just like a whole lot of money just floating around out there. Most of the budget has a purpose when it is created. The state must maintain a balanced budget or a pay-as-you-go limit, which means if the state wants to spend more money on something, that's fine, but it has to find the money to do it, either by creating more revenue or by cutting or taking revenue from someplace else or cutting some other program. All bills that get as far as appropriations must be sent to the comptroller. So the comptroller has to look at it and it has to decide, all right, this is going to be fine if we have this offset. Here are the offsets that you could possibly use for this. Limits for spending for needy independent children is set at 1% of state budget, which is an interesting kind of factoid, but you may want to be familiar with that idea. Basically, what this means is that we're only going to spend 1% of our budget on programs designed to help needy children. But that's still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. Let's not think that that's being miserly necessarily. But it is not a very flexible situation. So as Texas has grown, as the economic and demographics of the state have changed, some people have questioned whether or not that particular constitutional provision may need to be amended in order to accommodate for the realities of Texas. And when we talk about Chapter 12 here in a bit, we will talk about poverty being a serious policy issue for the state. And does this 1% limit play a role in that issue? I don't think I have any of these that you need to worry about. As oil and natural gas has fluctuated, so does the state. As I've mentioned throughout the course of the class, oil and natural gas are an incredibly important role in the functioning of the state of Texas. However, in 2008, when there was the big real estate bubble that led to the kind of mini recession of 2008, Texas did not fare quite as badly as others. Their real estate market had not become inflated the way that many others had. And so while there was still rough here, and there were still lots of people who lost their homes, still lots of people that lost their livelihoods and lost large chunks of their savings, it was not as bad as it was in other places. So one of the big problems was property taxes. Property taxes are always thought to be too high, no matter how high they are. So property owners are often pushing the legislature to lower them, and so. So the state sought to lower the tax rates to people who were property owners. But the problem is that this is a major tax income revenue. This is a main way that the state brings in income. It's also a major way that the education system is funded. But that they decided that in wake of the downturn in the economy and in some of the changes that had to be made, the property taxes were lowered. The other thing to remember is that because the Texas does have a 2-year budget cycle, sometimes the effects of these economic shifts are not felt immediately because they are kind of locked in for 2 years. Special sessions, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the governor and legislature. A lot of those special sessions have to do with public schools and funding them. How do we do that? I just mentioned before the $4 billion cut for the 12-13 funding cycle. Despite all of this, because of the kind of pro-business and pro free market and pro kind of libertarian mindset of the state overall still continued to do well. The most controversial budget issue in 2011 during this really kind of downtime was transportation, how to pay for fixing highways. Legislators finally brokered a compromise with their third special session. Highway funding, education funding are big expenses for the state. The good thing about these things is they also provide lots of jobs. So the more highways you build, the more people you can employ. But that also means that those are government-funded programs, either state or federal government-funded programs. So you have to have the money to pay them. So if you look back at history, you look at FDR and the New Deal, you look at some of the things that President Obama had proposed as part of the recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. If you even looked at some of the things that President-elect Trump has talked about, have been centered around this idea of infrastructure and building highways and building bridges and repairing the things that have worn out over time. And that's great. That puts people to work. That creates jobs. But it also costs lots and lots of money. And when you live in a fixed budget state, work on this biennium process and this process that requires a balanced budget, it becomes very difficult to meet those priorities in the same types of ways if you had some more flexibility. All right, it will continue to be an issue. Once again, we have chosen a path in Texas that we don't like to tax, we don't like to spend. And so therefore, it's going to continue to be a struggle moving forward. It's also going to be very It's also going to be very difficult, I believe, as we become more diverse, both culturally and economically, as our education system begins to need more from us. Then I think we'll find that the budget constraints are going to continue to cause problems moving forward. As you can see here, this is an interesting graph. Once again, California, Oregon, and Minnesota have the highest tax rates. Texas has none in terms of state income tax. All right, so that's all for Chapter 11. There's some good stuff in there, some important stuff in there about how those things are funded. Make sure you read Chapter 11. I will say there's probably 9 or 10 questions from Chapter 11 on your final test, on your test 3. It will be shorter, only 25 questions, and like I said before, the review I sent out via Canvas, I'll post it here on Canvas here in a bit. But there are 2 writing prompts. They're not hard, they're not challenging, but you will want to have thought about them and done some reflection on them before that time comes. All right, awesome, guys. Thank you.